Thank you very much for joining us for one of the highlights of our academic year, the Teaching and Learning Festival in the portfolio of teaching and learning, community engagement, and student success. On behalf of Professor Moche, before she welcomes you and I welcome her, you are most welcome, and we hope that you enjoy these 2 days with us. Every year, the Teaching and Learning Festival is hosted by 2 colleges, and this year it is the turn of the College of Law and the College of Human Sciences. The chair of the organizing committee is Professor Henrietta Kruger from the College of Law. And we would like to start off already by thanking her, madam. Most of you as academics will know when you are organizing an academic event or a conference, there is one of these things that just kind of becomes intractable, and the harder you try, the more you struggle. And this year our program has been that part. But we have a full and a very interesting program. So that is not the intractable part. The part is to get it into a sequence. The first part is that I would like to apologize for Professor Phillips, who is not well. And that is why I am here. My name is Britta Zawada. I'm the Deputy Dean of the College of Human Sciences. And I'm doing this session on behalf of Professor Phillips. The second part is that due to some unforeseen circumstances, our keynote speaker, Dr. Behari Leek, could not make it in time for 9 o'clock this morning. So we have switched around our session 4 with session 1. And I want to thank my colleagues that make up session 4 for rising to the call and assisting us and helping us to make this possible. It is always stressful to present, but then if you get kind of asked to present earlier, it makes it more stressful. So I want to thank Professor Dube, Dr. Hosbrook, and Professor Duplessis for their willingness to assist us. But before we start, we need to hear from our Vice Principal. Professor Moche became the Vice Principal, Teaching and Learning, Community Engagement, and Student Success on the 1st of January 2016. Oh, 1st of March 2016. And we appreciate her leadership, the style of her leadership, her involvement with the colleges, and the way she makes us part of this institution. She is extremely passionate about student success and about making teaching and learning this special thing for each and every academic. Professor Moche, in her previous life, was a mathematician, and she was the Dean of the College of Science, Engineering, and Technology. So I would like us to welcome to the stage our Vice Principal, Professor Moche.
Colleagues, good morning. We first must thank the organizing committee for working on this and getting us together and getting us to this point. Professor Kruger, Dr. Murray from CHS, and Ms. Naidu. Thank you all for working as hard on putting this together. But also, colleagues, to say that there are quite a few people behind scenes that sit and make things happen. And Dr. Zawada, even though you didn't say this, but also thank you for the midnight chats, for everything to try to get this together. Last night we had that our keynote speaker missed her flight, she wasn't, not that she was delayed for the flight, things changed, and somehow while she was sitting at the airport, her gate was changed, and she wasn't aware of that, and hence missed the flight. We struggled quite a bit to get her in on time, but her plane should be landing in the next 5 minutes or so. So thank you again for the colleagues that have agreed to swap sessions, but she will definitely be here. Our theme for this year is towards transforming learning and teaching, transforming pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment. And being academics that I know you are, and I know that we are, you probably sat and asked yourself, why first the swap on teaching and learning to learning and teaching, and also why the focus on transforming learning and teaching, transforming pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment. And let me first start with what was the thinking behind transforming learning and teaching. The thinking behind this was that if you look at teaching, you note that teaching is not a goal in itself, but rather that teaching occurs to bring about learning. Further, it was out of being acutely aware that teaching performance is generally measured by gains in student learning and not by teaching itself. Thus, when the thinking happened of putting learning first, it was an acknowledgement that teaching must be a student and learning-centered activity. And if you ask why the emphasis on transforming teaching and learning, we have been talking quite a bit about curriculum transformation, not only in the university, but across the sector. For us, we say that indeed we acknowledge that curriculum transformation in particular is a sector-wide imperative, but for us as an institution and for us particularly as a portfolio, the conversation has been that curriculum transformation and transforming how we teach is an academic imperative. That reflections on what we teach, how we teach, who teaches, who are our students, what are they learning, and how do we know, should be the norm in any academic institution. And we do so cognizant of the fact that the identity and purpose of the university has changed. So if you ask us simply to say why the focus, we say because it is what we do. Why the focus, we say that it's important to know what are we teaching, what are they learning, and how do we know? And most importantly, we say context matters. But again, we are reminded, as I said a few minutes ago, that the purpose of the university has changed, that the identity and purpose of higher education has undergone radical shifts in emphasis, First, from the medieval institutions, focusing on theology and philosophy, to the Humboldtian research institutions that were integral to the modernization of Europe, and that formed the basis of most American universities, and from institutions that served to reproduce the high administrative classes that managed colonial interests, to institutions that democratized knowledge post the 1968 protests that had challenged the prevailing order in many countries, particularly parts of our world. But more recently, the shifts have been from the institutions of the 1990s to the institutions that thrive to educate greater and greater numbers of young people in both conceptual knowledge and skills in the furtherance of economic development and competition. But if you take it even closer, is to the current reality of a diversity of system configurations and purposes, many are attempting to offer universal, transformed education in different institution types. What does it mean for us as an institution? For us as a university, we say we do so in a distance mode. We do so in an open distance and e-learning mode. So transformation cannot just be about content, but it's also about how we deliver that content. It's about how we also engage with our students. It's about how we assess them. It's about, most importantly, the type of students and knowledge we produce. So you will note that in the next 2 days, what we will attempt to do is to look at the theoretical frames that ground curriculum transformation, that ground theories around how we assess, to also how we deliver content, to also the best exemplars that we currently have on how we do this. And I don't want to stand here and come across as if this is a new thing. That within the institutions, we have best exemplars. That if we look around, we have people that actually have moved miles. We have colleges that have moved miles further than other colleges on how to do this. But ours, or what is important, is for us to engage. It's for us to meet in spaces like this and share ideas and demonstrate what we do and appreciate what we do. It is not to take out the stick and start hitting each other to say, why are you not doing this? But rather is to pause and say, what is it that we can learn from each other? What is it that we can embrace from what we're doing? And what is it that we can celebrate in what we're doing? Because from that moment, we hope that one, or at least some of us, when you're sitting down, you can say, aha, I always thought that I was the only one doing this. It looks like somebody else is doing it. Or, aha, I've always struggled with how to do this, but it looks like somebody else is doing it. But most importantly, it is how do we build that collegiality? Collegiality in ways that says teaching and learning matters. Collegiality that says there is no way that we can move forward in our agenda of teaching and learning unless we do it together. Yes, we will differ in our approaches. Yes, colleges will say, for us it does not make sense, but we will stand together and say, how do we do this? Because this is Zulu bathi indlovu yethu. I'm sorry if there's no Afrikaans translation for that or an English translation for that, but all that it says is that this is our elephant to eat. And so I'm hoping that as we engage in the next 2 days, colleagues, we will do so openly. We will do so with enthusiasm that we saw in the previous festival, but we will do so with the sole purpose of ensuring that teaching and learning matters. It matters not in terms of what we produce, it matters also in terms of how it takes us forward as academics. You will note, and I know I digress a little bit as I'm about to conclude, you will note that as a portfolio, we will move forward in saying that how do we ensure that when we consider promotions, for example, teaching and learning weighs even more. Not more so than research, not more so than its community engagement, but that it matters. And most importantly, you will note that when last year we looked at the scholarship of teaching and learning, it was not by accident. It was to say that scholarly teaching is important. And it was to say that we have a role to play in the generation of knowledge as far as teaching and learning is concerned. So please sit back, relax. We will not be sending you an email in the next 2 days to say you have not submitted X, because we want you to focus here. We will not stress you with saying you have not responded to Y. For the next 2 days, we will make sure that we shield you from all that, because we value the collective wisdom that is brought here. Welcome, and thank you again, Madam Program Director, and again, enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Moche, for setting the tone, both in terms of the gravity of what it is that we are doing, but also in terms of the joy that we can experience by doing it well, and by celebrating what we do well. So you will see that a large part of the program is about the nominees for the awards in excellence in teaching. You will see the categories next to candidates' names, and that is about sharing our knowledge, about showing how somebody else is doing it, and by acknowledging and celebrating those that are doing it well. I appreciate also your reference to the collegiality and that we must do it together. In the College of Human Sciences Framework for Curriculum Transformation, it says in the preamble, it is not only about doing the right things, it is about being in right relationship. And that is with each other as colleagues as well as with our students. So you will see in today's program, one of the new things in the Teaching and Learning Festival is that we have included the student voice. We felt, as the College of Law and the College of Human Sciences, that we cannot be talking about transforming the curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment without hearing how the students think about this. And it's also, in a way, trying to show how we can do this. The next part of the session has two parts to it. The first part is that, as you will know, Professor Moche's portfolio includes community engagement. So Professor Simi Dube will talk to us first about community engagement from her perspective as being responsible for community engagement in the College of Science, Engineering and Technology. And then the second part of the session will be the two nominees for the category. I have to read this because I tend to get it wrong. About institutional knowledge intuition. So colleagues, another part, I did say that, another part that Professor Moche mentioned is the joy, the enjoyment. It is a festival after all. So you will see that our program also includes some music and some art, and so that is also part of making it festive. Another thing that makes it festive is that we have flowers. And you will see the colors of the flowers kind of match the colors of the branding. Okay. In the College of Human Sciences, we are about exploding myths and stereotypes. We have a college administrator who has a PhD in art history, who is a man, but he loves arranging flowers. And he does it exceptionally well, as you can see. Dr. Johan Opperman spent his Sunday arranging these flowers for us. So even though he's in his office administering the college, can I ask you to thank him, please? Professor Dube, can we ask for her presentation to be, thank you. Professor Dube, as I said, is the Manager for Tuition and Community Engagement in the College of Science, Engineering and Technology. We thank her again for making herself available, for talking about community engagement, and for being shifted around. Madame, you're my new heroine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director, for the introduction, and colleagues, good morning. I feel really honored to be given this slot to speak to you about the community engagement and also the transformation of community engagement into the teaching and learning space. And as you actually are aware, this is not something that is new. We need to keep on having this conversation because when new things or new words come into space, we tend to separate things when we want to actually get everything integrated. So the transformation is also one word that I'll keep on maybe highlighting on because of the theme of this particular workshop. So for those that have heard from me regarding this topic, you will excuse me, but I'm sure there are other people. We've got a broader community today that might actually be interested in the conversation. Sorry. This is a very awkward place for me to stand because I depend on that and my sight is not that good. Can I move forward this way? Can you hear me from here? Okay. Of course, we have to start from somewhere. We always start these conversations from what the nation as a whole thinks about this type of a conversation. And then, of course, what Unisa as a university thinks about. And then we then extract that for our own spaces. And then there is a white paper in 2013 that actually speaks about community engagement and graduate community service. And it actually speaks of or defines community engagement as the scholarly activity of academic research and teaching. That involves external communities. So we look at the external communities and stakeholders in collaborative activities that address the social economic imperatives. So I highlighted that part because it actually speaks about also taking us as an institution to a space of what are we doing in response to the social economic imperatives of the country, imperatives of the continent as a whole. It doesn't do that only, it also does that while it's also enriching the teaching, the learning, and the research in our spaces. So we actually are supposed to be the leaders in reaching out or in being responsive to the communities, at the same time actually addressing or improving our teaching, our learning, and our research. And then, of course, when this call came out, when this conversation started, we all as the universities in South Africa started working around this, but in a way that we were not sure how we should actually proceed. So HEQC did then a study, which then in their report, it actually indicated that many of the community engagement initiatives that were in the institutions were just being done on an ad hoc nature, and that they were not linked to the academic project. So we want to then bring that engagement, bring what we do into the academic project so that it's not seen as a separate thing. And then, of course, we know we are in a season of constraints budgetary. We actually are facing the fees must fall, we are actually having all these challenges. So what the statement then went on to say was that it is then likely that future funding will be restricted to programs directly linked to the academic program. So for us at Unisa, community engagement is part of the academic program. Hence, it dwells under the portfolio of teaching and learning, student support, and community engagement. So to take it then further, sorry, this drive is just making me. To take it further, universities actually, some scholars have said university must have some link to and serve some useful purpose in addressing the major issues of the day, or else they become irrelevant. So as institutions, we need to be cognizant of our own continent, of our own nation, we should be actually aware of our national development goals, we should be aware of the sustainable development goals and so forth. Otherwise, we become irrelevant. We can be busy with work which is not actually of any importance to our communities. Hence the need to be reminded that whatever we do in our labs, whatever we do in our teaching and learning space should speak to the day-to-day issues of this nation. And then also, there is a statement that says the universities are increasingly justifying rising costs by defending their legitimacy and contribution to society. So when we come to budgeting or requesting for funding, we need to actually then show, are we viable, are we supposed to be running? Is there a reason why the government is supposed to be supporting us? Are we actually in the space where we are showing footprints in the communities of what we have actually done? Can people look at Unisa and see that we reached the communities and we transformed the communities' lives? Hence, they actually, that conversation. And then this takes us, this is an old slide which is from the Unisa Strategic Objectives 2016 to 2030, which was actually speaking about the institution rising to a place where we can start putting in place, for instance, the modalities of how we'll put community engagement into the teaching and learning. How will we integrate community engagement with the teaching and learning? How will we actually have a structure, and how will we actually implement this? Of course, we might have been overtaken by time, but this is supposed to be something that we don't put down and say, now we are chasing something different. We need to think about, as we speak about transformation, could this be a vehicle for us to see that type of an integration? Could community engagement, vice versa, also ensure us to see that type of transformation in our curriculum? So we need to broaden our minds. We don't have to put things down at the moment. We have to have this as we actually are supposed to report at some stage or reflect back to say, where have we gone? So I thought then I will then touch on some of the examples that other people have used in terms of the integration of the community engagement with the teaching and the learning. And by the way, we have been discussing in the college, we have been discussing at other spaces to say, now that we're talking about so much about curriculum transformation, where are we with the integration? How can we now bring this together? Is this space, where can we see that not only for us to tick the boxes to say we have done X and Y and Z, but to actually reflect on the level of integration, on the level of what transformation, and also see that what we are saying is the integration or the transformation really responds to social and economic issues without just picking the dots. So we have examples from others that have already done that in the space, that have actually gone ahead. We have actually discipline-based. In this case, there's a student presence in the community, where you actually have the course content being on the basis of the student analyzing, understanding the theory of that particular subject, and then applying what they've learned within that community. So there is a presence of the student within the community. It could be a problem-based approach where students relate to the community much as a consultant working for clients, or the students work with the community members to understand a community problem, and that's very important. There are spaces, even as we work on our projects, where we assume we understand what the community needs are, but we don't necessarily understand. And also to enter into the community is structured in its own way. We know that there are community leaders and so forth. So for us to have that a clear understanding of what the need is, what the problem, without prescribing it from our white elephants as university and just going to inform, we need to actually get that engagement. So also the students can learn from that space how to enter into a community, how to actually engage with the community. They should actually learn the structures, respect the structures within the communities. So as we think and say we can have a problem-based, we can't just say to the students, go and do something for us to actually tick it and say, yes, the student did that, not knowing how the student actually engaged with the community or related with the community. So we need to ensure that if we're going that route, the students have been empowered, they are prepared, they have an understanding of what different types of communities speak of. Otherwise, that's where we get the students going there, the students get hurt, the communities are also in a process of actually kicking people out of their communities because they feel that we have not done things the proper way. So we need to actually prepare the students for that. And for us in the sciences, we always see, for instance, things like energy, things like water, things like recyclement as spaces of us working within the community. So it opens us some space for us to actually engage in that way. But also, if it's a problem-based, we can maybe even think about, we have our IT systems, how do we actually get involved in working with the community from that space? And then we have, even on our plans, this was a conversation that we had some year or 2 years ago. We even took it to our plans to say, we would like to actually reflect on capstone courses. What will that mean to have a capstone module that speak to the integration of community engagement, and also maybe bringing in the transformation into that? So that is another space. Here, we are now looking at students maybe who have actually gone through the course content, but they are empowered. They are not only empowered to just have the sciences, they need then to get an understanding of their preparedness to enter into the community. So you design for majors or minors in a discipline at the final or at an honors level. So the students draw knowledge that they've already learned and combine it with the relevant service work in the community. So the students actually then take it to actually that level. And then what we already have in place in some cases across the university could be service learning, could be WIL as well, which we have in the engineering. We have undergraduate community-based action research, which is another space, or the directed study extra credit, where you have small credits within the curriculum that actually are saying to the student they've learned either something about transformation or something about the community, what needs to be actually integrated, tackled in those communities. And having said that, I remember at the academic planning session, we had small groups where we had discussions about some of these things. But people were actually feeling that a problem-based or a research at undergraduate level would not work. But we've seen it in other spaces where even at a lower stage, lower than the honors, lower than the masters, that if you put small layers of that research or of that engagement, it builds to something, it builds to our graduateness attributes that we speak of at the end of the day, if we have those small layers introduced from lower levels at undergraduate study. So in summary, really, of the ways that other people have integrated, you can do what we have suggested as a once-off or one-time group service project. You can have option with a course, within a course rather. You can have it within or required in a course, action research projects, discipline capstone modules, and so forth. The only problem with going that route is that, of course, we need to transform our minds in terms of the module redevelopment, in terms of content development, because we can actually get to a place where we just want to put an assignment, put something, and then we say there is evidence, but we need to actually take time to design for that type of, it's not something that we just pass on and then we say we are ticking boxes. We need to reflect on where is the engagement with the community in this particular curriculum, where is the transformation taking place. So those spaces should come out of the content that we actually have. So the spaces or the examples that they have actually tried to do this integration, of course, they've picked that it is time consuming. Just like developing a new curriculum, it's not just something that we can add a few activities without introducing the learners at the beginning what the module is all about or what the course is all about. And for us, we are in a space where each and every period we develop modules. We always submit modules to the STLCC for redevelopment, for maybe new, completely new modules that actually brought on the table for approval. But maybe that's when we are planning, we need to think about what are these modules about? Is there any space in there, and for which type of integration can we actually embed in there? Of course, we always say that our programs are already so full, we can't find space to actually get this integration. But I think if we step back and look at the whole content, we might actually find that space. So it is time consuming. Also, it is a struggle to ensure that what we are doing is positive to the community, or there is a positive impact. So how do we ensure that what we've developed in our programs is impactful? So we need to have a way to track, a way to, it's not just the assessment in terms of students writing, but how are the communities actually transformed? How is this module, how is this project-based initiative transforming the community? And how can we actually measure? Can we track that? Can we actually verify that indeed community X, before we entered there with this particular group of students, was at this baseline, and now after the intervention, after the engagement, we are seeing this particular transformation. So also the other challenge is to ensure that there is student learning in this package. Is there student learning? Are students prepared well enough to successfully complete a community engaged or a community-based project? How is their preparedness? So we have to actually think about, these are things that we also speak about in the graduate attributes. How are our students prepared to enter into these communities and work with the communities and have an impact within these communities? We have in the college some examples of where people have tried. Sorry, maybe it's too small for people to read at the back. We have some modules when we are doing the QEP, is quality evaluation project, which speaks of the transformation. We were actually looking at the things, are we at any space thinking or close or doing something about these things? And then we sat in the college and tried to find any small activities that speak to the integration. So we identify that, and I know there are other colleges that have done that. I've seen the list is actually longer. So we have 16, but what we haven't done as a college is to now look at each and every one of them and remember the questions that we posed in terms of the challenge. Is this impactful to the community? Is the student prepared well enough for this type of work? So we actually have examples, about 16 examples, but my question is, yes, we could have this, but is it actually working? So that is not necessarily saying we've got all of them ticked. We are still in the process to evaluate that. But what I wanted to touch, one of them actually gives this, one of the modules gives the student even the opportunity to go. They have to actually identify a community on their own. They identify the community. They actually explain how they actually decided on that particular community. What did the community say was the problem that they needed resolved? And you need to show evidence in the portfolio that there was that interaction. How did they enter? Was it through a community leader? Well, you know, all those aspects that they are there. And then until they get to a place where the community says they are the one that actually need to get that assistance. We have also a learner research summit that is teaching us some things that we started it, but we did not actually have an understanding why we were doing the learner research summit. It was a nice event or project that we have. But what we're seeing out of this project, the project is teaching us things that we can actually learn from it and implement it in our own teaching and learning space. For instance, if we think of the way the students actually engage with the community, the students are given a broad theme. Then, without us going to the students and taking them to the community, they work in their communities to actually find out. These are not students, they are learners from high school. So if the learners from high school can engage with their own community, can engage with the hospitals, can engage with the supermarkets, whatever the problem will be at that stage, surely I think our students at university have that actually preparedness as well. So we have, for instance, a theme that the students will be given. For instance, this year we had application of science, engineering, and technology in an African context, which was broad. So we give it to them. They come together with the mentors, of course, and the educators, and try to think what could be a topic that speaks to that theme, that speaks to application of the science, engineering, and technology. So we got interesting topics coming up. For instance, natural cure and remedy to have Africa independent for health and well-being. This is a topic from one of the schools. Here they were speaking of the natural products that are used in Africa for the cure and for the remediations of some diseases. Somewhere is talking about the reclaim, reuse, and recycle. Are we doing enough? And in their projects, you can see that they've engaged. They have in their presentations when they come, how many people they interviewed, how many people they sat together with to find out the issues about solar. For instance, efficiency on the solar cookers. So they wanted to find out what are the challenges. Either it's in an informal settlement, they go to the community and sit with the community. So there is that engagement. And in fact, they are tackling problems that are actually very important for us, for our own society, which is very interesting. So we even see the engagement, the questions that are raised by their peers in actually working with engaging with the topics. It shows some sort of critical thinking. For instance, it speaks of the critical literacy. The students are independently working. They can actually go into the community and try to analyze at that young age. So surely there are things that we are trying to extract here. We will come up with maybe a project in terms of research and look at these students to see where they go. I think, sorry. Because of time, I would like to stop here because I think I've got only 2 more minutes left. But I wanted to give an example, which is a UNESCO example, which is not only to show that these conversations are not unique to South Africa. This integration, or what you're talking about transformation, is a global conversation. Even for the continent, it's actually happening. I wanted to just give an example of Sudan with the University of Khartoum and the Sudan University of Science and Technology, where they neatly show the integration between their community engagement project and what their learners, their university students rather, are actually doing. And these are computer science students, that they are learning key things in class in a project-based, problem-based project, where they work now with the community to actually assist with the capacity, of course, of the other stakeholders, like the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education. So these are the stakeholders, but they look at the problem, they go into the community as a whole and identify what is the problem with women not bringing their children for vaccination, for instance. What are their challenges? So one of the projects was about the women that just had children and they're not bringing their kids for vaccination. And the other one was about the the delivery systems that are there. How do they get to know? So it was a problem that the community themselves said, in a village very far, we have these issues. If we actually have these structures, if we know how to work with this, we'll actually get better. So the students worked on those, and they are empowered in their content to actually resolve those problems. But I will not actually go into that particular conversation because of time. My 25 minutes is up. Thank you.
In decoloniality, we talk about a decolonial turn. And it seems to me the College of Science, Engineering and Technology has made a decolonial turn with their community engagement. And so even though you didn't use the word decoloniality, you are being decolonial. Because there are two other aspects which I would like to highlight, which make it decolonial. The first one is one of the aspects of decoloniality is that it is partly about looking back at our history and the things that were wrong in bringing us here, but it is also about looking forward and about being creative and about working on creative alternatives for the future. And I think Professor Dube has done that admirably. The second part is, in decoloniality, is about activism. And now whether you want to use the word activism, and I think sometimes people understand activism as only being political. Activism, even radical activism, can be about engaging with issues in the community and actually having that agency to change it. A third part, which I think, and I'm beginning to think we'll see some themes coming out, because I'm already seeing some themes coming out of this. It's the idea of students not being passive receivers of knowledge, but about students being creators of new knowledge based from where they are. And that is also very much a decolonial theme, students as knowledge producers, not just the professors. Professor Dube? Thank you very, very much, sis. We will have the three of them up here at the end so that you can engage with them. So we'll just go through the speakers first, and then we'll have a conversation at the end. Prof. Tani, it's your turn.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. While they're working there, apologies to those people who have heard my story before, or there's hopefully actually some of the people who participated in our project here as well. The topic is interactive classes, but what we start developing is a pedagogy of what I call face-to-face at a distance. What is a problem? And I think we're all familiar with this problem. This is our problem, a Unisa problem. Students in isolation, the old issue, I don't even need, everybody struggle. That's actually our struggle every day. How do we make contact with our students? tuition support, impersonal, limited possibilities. And I think nostalgically, some of you will remember those days when we did discussion classes. We all fly down to Durban and Cape Town and Polokwane and everywhere, and we do the discussion classes to have some kind of contact with our students. What's the problem with that? We tried, you remember the satellite studio down in Sunnyside, where we tried to work and get this kind of synchronous teaching going. We have video conferencing. We've tried a lot of things. And the question is, how to reach many students, not only those few that you can reach in this way. Satellite classes, video conferencing, small numbers. That is our problem. The challenge is to talk about scalable synchronous teaching. And there we have seen, and we've tried to say, okay, YouTube Live, that seems to be a possibility. And we looked at that, and the main thing there is, there's no limit to what YouTube can provide. And I gave the example, Kate and William, can't remember, it's not our royals, colonial royals, but in any case, when at their wedding, about 1 billion people watched it live. And interesting, Google told me at the time, they didn't even need it to take extra measures to make it possible. So Google and YouTube seems to be an option. And then, if you remember, if you look at YouTube streams, there's a live chat function. And if you combine the two, then you say, okay, there we have a nice interactive possibility. But the problem there is, when we started, and sorry, I'm sort of off the screen. I try to make use of the best of I can, all the space. But when we started working with Google, and we set up a lab, etc., but one of the main things was to say, we want to do this live streaming. That's what the lab is for. We start working with them and with their premium partners. Google don't have an operational arm in South Africa, so they appoint people to work with us, and Grove is that company. And when we started working with them on our own Google project, they indicated that they have already established a platform with the University of Stellenbosch. A very simple, basic thing, combining the chat function with the live streaming in a basic interface that students can access easily. Just a question, Q&A function, one after another. And then what we did was to say, okay, if that's possible, let's then go and see how we can simplify and make it possible to embed, for example, a live survey, for example, to other resources, embedding tools, such as, for example, a video, etc. Because the problem is, if the technology, and that's our experience, isn't simple, students won't use it, lecturers won't use it. It has to be very simple. It has to be on one interface. And what we found with the basic tool was you have to switch between tabs. You have open tabs beforehand, and then you switch between tabs, etc. It's very complicated, and they don't know how to get back to the broadcast if students have to do a survey on the side. So we have to embed it. And the Q&A, what we found was it has to be like similar to what you have on Facebook, for example. It has to be achronological. So ask a question, have threads. And we managed then to embed at least 3 threads so that a conversation can continue after, and I will explain how that works. Okay. What was the result of this? It means that class can be attended from anywhere on any device, either cell phones, and I will give you statistics on how students use it. It can be from a computer, etc. we can also broadcast from anywhere. On Friday, I was at Potchefstroom at the Art Club Festival, and I had to present to the College of Accounting. And it's no problem. I simply just went to a silent place in the guest house, and I could broadcast from there and present to accounting. I could do it from the middle of Paris in France if I wanted. So there's no limitation on where from I can do it. And students can attend it in the same way. And what we have done now, it is a session that's recorded, and then students can access it later if they couldn't attend live, and you can keep the Q&A live for a predetermined time to say, if a student wants to continue the conversation, comments, questions, that conversation can go on. It doesn't stop there. The pedagogical model that we try to develop, we talk about face-to-face at a distance. Or we can actually say into your face at a distance, if you choose to do that. Just a very brief way. For example, I just want to show, in the previous slide, I've shown the Q&A there, and you can choose. You can either choose to have the camera as the main to have a conversation, or you can switch between that and a presentation, for example. And you can have yourself there to say, okay, face-to-face, a student can see me, but the emphasis is on that. And on the side, of course, always a Q&A where students can comment, ask questions, etc. What do we mean when we say face-to-face? And what I try to do it from a theoretical point of view, in communication science, those who are familiar in our discipline will remember Marshall McLuhan in the 60s said the medium is the message. And what he meant there was the incredible impact that a medium has structurally on how you think and how you behave. And from that theoretical point of view, we look at the pedagogical perspective to say, we have an interpersonal encounter, educational pedagogical encounter with a student. Normally, if a student comes into my office, sits across my table, I can explain things to him. And what we look at is the dynamics of that interaction and try to simulate that. And in essence, what happens is the medium or the technology replaces the lecturer, and if I may say it softly, almost fool the student into perceiving it as an interpersonal kind of thing. Because why? The student has an opportunity to influence that interaction. He can ask questions. Even 20,000 students can ask questions. And by looking at the question, they can vote for a question to say, yes, that's a question that I would like to see answered. And they can prioritize it by voting for that question. I will show in a while how a student can do that. So they have an influence. They can actually determine the flow of that. And you can, for example, use, if I try to explain a concept, I can have a short survey with MCQs explaining this is what the concept, and I test it. Did I explain it properly so that students actually understand what I said? And I can tell the students, in the next 20 seconds, please do that survey for me. I get the live results, and I can immediately adjust my strategy to explain, to help them understand. So yes, how does it work? So a basic thing with the interface for the student will be like that. In this case, it's a lab. Professor Moche presenting there. First registrations, the presentation, the Q&A on that side. The Q&A with threads, and you can go back, and then, so that gives an opportunity. Also, if a team, for example, works together, they can, in the meantime, attend to written questions and identify those that need to be answered verbally. On the other hand as well, so just there, and you've missed that, that's off the screen. There's, for example, an example of a survey where a student can just click on that survey to get things done. In this case, to go back, so students can, the Q&A in the office, you have an opportunity for students to interact. Alternative, again, it's kind of off the screen, where you have a smartboard in the lab. You work on the smartboard, the presentation on this side, and the students can see the lecture in action before the startboard. And the Q&A is still on the side here to give them opportunities to respond to a live explanation on that side. What we try to say is we have something here that a basic functionality. All the functions, it can drive, it's interactive. You can decide how you're going to use it. For example, the accounting people have used the smartboard as well as a presentation and mix and match. So you can decide. It's either going to be carrying passengers, or you can do some futuristic freight, carry freight as well. It's up to everybody. So it's a basic thing, and it's up to all of us to decide how we're going to use it, how we're going to optimize it in order to get that feeling back that it's a lecturer speaking to a student. What do students say? We didn't get any negative responses. The only negative response we got from one student was, now I have to be into ICTs. I'm studying communication science. I'm not an ICT student. You know, now suddenly I have to know everything about ICTs. And I didn't even have to respond to it. His peers came back and tell him, listen, you have to work with ICTs in the workplace. You better start learning how to deal with this. Otherwise, you're not going to cope anyway. We had, with that first interview, that first year registered students, did a survey. I'm sorry, parts of the thing is off the screen, but a number of students, a high number of students, have said, do you think it was useful? They did see it as useful. Do you want to see similar broadcasts? You can see high numbers, 80s, 90s. Do they see the interactive tools as useful? Yes. And the interesting thing that we all need to take note of, when we ask them, would they like to learn in this way? The interesting thing was about 94%, 95% of the students said, yes, we would like to see this implemented in teaching and learning in modules. We don't claim it's a representative sample, but of those students who participated, I think 285 was a good response for that. It gives you access to the Google Analytics. Where did the students come from? It gives you also access to say, what device did they use? Computers, etc., etc. So it gives you much more insight into our students and into the student body. It even gives you the operational system that they use, operating system that they use, Windows, Android, etc. Conclusion. Every lecturer can now do live and interactive broadcast to their students. It's a kind of connection. We try to understand what it is about. And I'm using McLuhan's model to try and get a better understanding of how this medium influences the message eventually. So a lot of research opportunities, I think, for everyone who's using it and to start playing around with it. It's recorded. It can be used, for example, as a resource. You tell students, go and watch this, and then follow it up with a discussion. And there are lots of possibilities how that can also be facilitated. So our students don't need to study in isolation anymore. It becomes an interpersonal almost, and I think we're back where we were in the philosophers' times, where we have students and lecturers in dialogue and not teaching as such anymore. So hopefully we can get back to that position, and we good on our way. If you need anything, thank you for listening. If you want to participate, to come and join and play with us, we've got a nice playpen there called the Digital Teaching Lab. You're welcome. Please contact me and some of our staff members. We will really try and help as much as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donnie, for sharing that with us. And, you know, sometimes it actually helps to see something more than once because you see different things. What struck me here now was that it would require a different kind of academic than somebody who just likes to sit in their office doing one thing at a time. It's about multitasking. I mean, to manage that thing with actually talking, the PowerPoint, the questions, answering the questions, and so on. So it talks to the kind of skills and mindset that we have as academics who may have been used to, in distance education, not to be confronted with student questions in that kind of immediate way. So thank you for that. Professor Donnie du Plessis, in a former life, if I might say, was chair of the Department of Communication Science. He's on R&D at the moment, so thank you very much for coming in. But what I like about this, first of all, you heard him talking about the playpen. There's this idea of fun, of actually enjoying teaching and learning and trying out new ideas and making it fun. And I always say to the mentees as well, even if your students are at a distance, they sense your attitude. If you are negative, but if you are having fun, if you are enjoying yourself teaching, then the students actually do feel that, even though and don't ask me how, it was even like that when we were still doing pure correspondence. The students could pick up on your attitude. The other thing which I would like to highlight about this is, he didn't necessarily mention it, but how external grants actually paid for this project and for setting up this lab. And it also speaks to this idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning, that we can be systematic about our innovation, that we can get funding for our innovation and build it so that it actually takes the whole university forward. And that we are different. Some people are in their spaces doing smaller things, but somebody who was in a position where he knew the university could use those resources. Thank you, Prof. Our next speaker is Dr. Connie Hosbrook. She's from the College of Education in the Department of Psychology of Education, and we invite her to the podium to give her presentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All protocol observed. And I really want to say a very good morning to all of you on a very rainy and a grey Monday morning. Thank you for being here, and I really do hope that you will be able to take something from this presentation home today. The title of my presentation is The Ubuntu of Teaching and Learning. Okay. It's me and technology. Can you just give a second slide, please? Sorry, but I'm going to continue in the meantime while we are waiting for the slides to come. First, I want to acknowledge Professor Google, because the images I'm using today, it's harvested from Google Images. And then I also want to acknowledge all my colleagues and all my students who contributed on different ways and during different times to my academic journey, and especially to today's session. Thank you. Let me try again. Okay, it's working. In my content, I'm going to reflect on my first experiences being at Unisa, and then I will just reflect on some of the criteria that's been used for this nomination. My first experiences at Unisa was very negative and very bad. HR was telling us during our on-board course that this is an employer of choice. I had totally a different experience. I walked into a cloud of uncertainty. It was a new college and a new department. The department was about quite nearly a year old. We had to face many challenges on very different levels. And the emotional and the physical environment I experienced to be very hostile and very cold. I had no office space. I had not even a chair to sit on. And that was a very bad and a very painful experience for me. So I found myself during my first weeks totally confused and within a reality shock, because this is not what I was thinking how a university is functioning. And I had to make serious decisions. Are I going to resign because do I really need this? Or what am I going to do? I'm going to try to make maybe the best out of this. So I've decided to become a professional squatter. So in the mornings, I was waiting for the door to open and then asked my colleague, can you please squat in your office for today? And then after 2 hours, 3 hours, the colleague had another appointment and I was kicked out. So I had my backpack, walking around, and it was becoming more and more heavier with all the teaching and learning material. It was not nice. So then the turning point was when I realized that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that was feeling like this. And there were 3 incidents that was really making a very positive impact on my decision by that time not to leave Unisa within my first few weeks. The one was a very supportive and a very empathetic COD, Professor Sini Naidu. Secondly was Mummy at the EIP that was looking after my personal special needs. And then what I really do value so much is that 2 of my colleagues, Sabu and Ramaduhani, decided to share one office, creating an open office space for me and another colleague. And I really do value that so much. And that is when I made the promise to myself. I will, as far as possible within my powers and my control, I will make sure that people coming after me won't have that same experience. And I will do my best to make Unisa a better place. So the first criteria for the nomination is academic leadership. And there are 3 things that I really want to leave here and say, guys, please become involved. Start becoming involved in all these different committees, on college level, on institutional level, within the department. The other thing is, you must be willing to take the lead. That is why we are here. We are academics, we are leaders. Embrace that, take it on. That's scary, but it forces you to other levels. We were talking about the opportunities. I have been for 12, 15 years outside on my own in a private practice before joining Unisa. And I can tell you there are so many opportunities within Unisa. We were talking about the grants. Make use of that, because that will push you to higher levels. For example, one of my first committees that I was getting involved in was the marketing. And that's one of the committees that academics are looking down on. That's for administrative supportive people. But being part of that committee, the next time I have receiving calls to be on television shows during prime time, SABC, INN7, receiving invitations to participate in radio programs, journalists contacting you, asking your opinion, start writing opinion articles. That's another way of scholarship and showing that you are and what you are doing. And also, yes, it's part of marketing, but it's also making our academic voice to be heard. How to change values? That's a very nitty-gritty thing. Is that possible? And is that possible within Unisa to be able to change values? And one way of doing that is through storytelling. Stories are very empowering and very enriching, powerful tools. And I really want to thank the organizing committee to include storytelling also as part of the festival program. Thank you. So, when I was being asked in 2015 to facilitate our Bosparade, believing in stories, being a narrative therapist, I've decided then to make use of a narrative, and I based the theme of our Bosparade on a story by Jack van der Meer, The Town Called Potential. We had no Bosparade in 2016, and in 2017, we continue with our departmental story. Now, just quickly, The Town Called Potential by Jack van der Meer, it's a story about a town called Potential, situated at the mountain Possibility. And on this mountain, there are dragons. And the people of this little town, they were taking care of the little baby dragons, looking after them as pets. So when the children start disappearing, and later the adults start disappearing, until the people start realizing that, wow, it's our pet dragons that starts eating us up. So the story is about this man, I call him the strange one, that was confronting mediocrity and the way how things are being done. So using that theme, we have been able to identify our pet dragons within our department. There were 7 of them. And then we have divided ourselves in task teams to see how we're going to address these dragons. And we were so amazed 3 years later when we look back and we reflect on our progress that a lot has happened. There were some new little baby dragons that was born, and that we are aware of them and we are taking care of them. But at least we could have changed the values from more to a friendly, welcome, warming type of department. And I don't know if my Professor McKay is here. We are the #1 department when it's coming to deadline, administrative and participation and things like that. Yeah, this can be done. When we look at how we can improve operational efficiency, I want to touch on 2 things today. The one is that we have to recognize the human factor, and I think this is what Prof. Dani also has said. It's so easily within our ODEL environment that we reduced our students to student number, module codes, to emails. And we forget that there is a living person at the end of that email, at the end of that SMS, that's waiting for an answer. You know, one thing that we really, from our department, that was opening my ears, my eyes, my heart, was participating in Student Indabas. It's making such a difference to hear the student voice. And thank you for including them in the festival, because it's through interactions of Student Indabas including them in programs to hear the student voice and to recognize also their frustrations, their irritations. But on the other hand, also remember that the lecturers are also only human beings. When we had this incident last week, Monday, where a group of people were walking at HEH on the 6th floor, banging against the doors and making noise, that's very intimidating. And that's also degrading the lecturer and the environment, because it's not a nice experience, and it's very difficult to work in circumstances like this. If you are one lecturer taking care of 900 students, it's quite a lot, and you cannot immediately answer emails on that same morning when 500 students are complaining that they haven't received their student material. So just be sensitive that we are all humans. Sorry. And then the second one is the lecturers' agreement. I am very sorry to say that professional abuse is well and alive in Unisa. There's this tendency from more senior academics to only focus on research activities. And we all know there's a lot of incentives for you to do that. And the poor stepchild, that is our core function, teaching and learning, is always being pushed aside. So what's happening that new lecturers joining Unisa and more junior lecturers are being left to do the nitty and the gritty and the dirty work when it's coming to teaching and learning. In order to address this, we have developed a memo of agreement between lecturers so that people know what's the different tasks that needs to be done, what's been expected from who, on what stage of a teaching and learning process, and especially to protect people and staff members when it's coming to the end of the day to IPMS. Another thorny issue is that of external markers. I think we are all being confronted with external markers not meeting deadlines, poor quality of marking, and what's really an issue is subcontracting by external markers to their friends and to their colleagues and to their family members. And this becomes very thorny. And we have developed a code of conduct where we address all these type of issues. For example, we make sure that people understand what's their roles, what's their responsibilities, how the whole appointment process works. Because like my one external marker said to me, do you really expect me to work over weekends? So I don't understand what does it mean to be independent contractor and things like this. The way how tariffs are being calculated, due process, including quality assurance measures, that this is how it's going to be done, and that we all have understanding. And then we also infuse the POPI Act and confidentiality into this. My time is running up. When it's coming to improve Unisa systems, just like the student voice, let the academic voice be heard. When we are confronted with disjointment of different functions, dysfunctionality, don't be quiet, speak up. A word of warning. You can be punished for doing that. I was being warned to keep my silence, and I was being said, you talk too much. So just, if you're an activist, you must remember that it won't always be valued. When it's coming to infuse relevant quality standards, I think at the end of the day, the message that I want to say, it's not about our own agendas, our personal agendas. It's not about our own egos. This is about our institutional common goal, and that is of excellence. Let we strive and let we do whatever that's possible to make sure that we are an institution of excellence. one of my heroes is Madiba. I think because we also share the same birthday on the 18th of July, but also for the person and the principal person that I want to say is still, because he's still very alive in my life. Barack Obama, during his funeral, has said the following: there is a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, a word that captures Mandela's greatest gift, his recognition that we are all bound together in ways that are invisible to the eyes, that there is a oneness to humanity, that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and by caring for those around us. In conclusion, I think the magic glue that keeps everything together is that of caring. And we call ourselves, we are an African university in service of humanity. But if we don't embrace and internalize the principles of Ubuntu, and especially of caring, then we are going backwards and not forwards. Thank you.
Dr. Connie, thank you very much for that. What I really enjoyed is starting out with your personal story and then going to using that to learn and to move not just yourself, but the whole department forward. Thank you for that. But then still not doing the individualistic thing. I also enjoyed the differences in gendered presentations, the female and so on, or the feminine. If I may just also point out to you, you will see in the program there, one of our PhD students in visual arts, Zingisa Nkosikulu, is also participating by having a live graffiti wall. But he's not going to do it by himself, he wants you to assist him. So when you go out for tea or lunch or another kind of break, the graffiti wall is there. So we want you to express yourself about the festival, about the program, about your own experiences, about what you are doing to transform teaching and learning. Whilst we talk about this idea of graffiti being a form of expression, it is also in our transformation acknowledging different forms of knowledge. And I think Dr. Connie also did that very well with the stories and the narratives being ways of learning. And how can we bring these different ways of knowledge, the narrative, the visual, into our teaching and learning? There are roving mics. Can I just check with the team? Thank you, Nomshadu. Questions, comments for the speakers. And maybe if you have, maybe we should just do it this way. If you have something for Dani, do Dani first. So can I just see if there are questions specifically for Dani? But then also know that, I mean, all of these colleagues are here, so you can also engage them afterwards. Is there any you know, it's very difficult. Is there any specific question for Professor Dani du Plessis? Thank you, Prof.
Just a brief comment. Something that came to my mind is that at CSET we already have quite an extensive tutor system. You know, where tutors engage on a weekly basis with their students. I think if we could streamline and make the software available to even the tutors, it could have kind of a multiplication effect. You know, even if we start with once a week, where tutors use the software and communicate, and also the numbers are more limited. One tutor is allocated to something like 70 students, so it can make it much more effective as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of possibilities. We've seen that it can be working for a module of 20,000 students at the time, but also for tutors. And we are in the process, hopefully, to institutionalize the technology so that it will be widely available. At the moment, it's managed by us in the department and my laboratory manager, which have eventually limited capabilities. So if you pressure for that, it will also help us to get the institutionalization also quicker. So you can actually help. Thanks.
Thank you. Nomshadu? Okay, Prof. Brown? Or
Good morning. Are you from this campus, or I'm from the Florida campus? So I'm just curious.
I'm from Mackleneuk, yes.
Okay, I'm from the School of Computing, and I think one of the major challenges we face there. Sorry, I'm here. Yes, is our bandwidth. And your solution, and it's obviously something we want to institute as well, is quite reliant on the stability and the available bandwidth that we have. In fact, with times it's so slow that you do a ping to try and find out what the bandwidth speed is, doesn't even respond. So I'm not sure if the bandwidth here is better, but I think we will all agree that moving forward in distance education and utilizing the technology, will have to make it a absolute priority to up our infrastructure in such a way that we can utilize these technologies consistently. It's a problem if it works today and you set up a meeting and then tomorrow all the students is mailing you and say, listen, we cannot get connected. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we are very much aware of that. You will see I will run out in a while and quickly to the parking lot and use my mobile data to do that presentation that I'm going to do at 11 o'clock. For a simple reason, our Wi-Fi on campus is not necessarily reliable, but secondly, there are some firewall issues that we still need to sort out. To be able, from the lab, we have a dedicated network line. So in that case, it's a prioritized line. So the lab is predictable. But to do it from your laptop is problematic. But ICT promised me that they will be able to sort it out. And there's an issue about, and it's technical, it's download speeds and upload speeds. In this case, normally people are downloading and we have capacity for uploading, which is what we do. It doesn't use much bandwidth, a high definition, 720 broadcast will take you about 280 megabytes per hour. So I'm sometimes broadcasting from under my tree, literally, and it doesn't take that much bandwidth. But if it's going to be started using on a grand scale infrastructure, we'll have to adjust to accommodate that.
Thank you. It's all about scalability, as you mentioned as well. Can I just check if we find, can we release Prof. Dani? Oh, there's a question there at the back.
Thank you. This is also to Prof. Dani du Plessis. I'm Lungelo Apagati from the English Studies Department. I'm very interested in the live streaming that you have just presented today. What I'd like to know are two things. How do we book if we need to make a booking? Because with video conferencing, you just go onto the intercom and you're able to make a direct booking. Is it also possible to do the same for live streaming?
Yes.
That's the first question. If you can just hold for the second one, then you can respond to both. Okay, thank you. The second question is it possible that while live streaming is taking place, students can still access it via the old video conferencing setup? The reason why I'm asking this is because in some areas, students cannot afford to buy enough data bundles to stay on the live streaming for the hour or however long it takes to present. But they still want to be there at that time and ask their questions and get their responses immediately. And that is possible when they assemble at the whatever nearest regional campus where they normally would have access to VC. So is it possible to have the two running simultaneously to accommodate such students?
It is a little bit, let me start with the last question. It's a little bit problematic to run both simultaneously, but what students can do, if they can go to a campus where they would have accessed the video conferencing, they can actually use a Wi-Fi at that regional center to access the broadcast. So it's, and do it on a personal level, or regions can, for example, then, when there's an open venue, just use it as a receiver to do it. So it's not, they just go do a YouTube sort of, go to the link and then access it. So there is a lot of, we are investigating possibilities. I am looking at what we call reverse billing, and the University of Pretoria have already, there's a person there who's doing bulk purchases of data for other universities. And there's a possibility for us to also join that initiative. And what happened then with reverse billing is if you access this link via this IP address, it will be free for the student and Unisa will pay for it. That's if we have the money. So we are investigating all these kinds of possibilities. The first question, if you really are interested, we have limited capacity, but those who want to, we never turned anybody away yet. So you can contact our secretary in the Department of Communication Science and ask you to transfer you to our laboratory manager, the digital teaching laboratory, or you can contact me via my email address. I've had it at the, but you will find it in the system. And then send me an email and I will forward it to our lab manager to accommodate you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. There's another question there, Nomshadu, just in front of the, look at me. That's going to be the last question for Dani.
Okay, thank you. I'm Professor Menard from College of Education. I just want to know, how is that different from the big blue button? Because when I saw your presentation, it just looked the same with all the same features. And Unisa is subscribing to the big blue button and facilitating it, although you also have sometimes that you have limited access and the students have limited access. But I discovered if you don't show your face and you don't do it FaceTime, then it works very well.
Yes, green button works perfectly.
Blue button.
Blue button.
The big blue button.
The big blue button, yes. There are other technologies as well doing similar things, except for Google's scalability. They don't meet the scalability. Secondly, the ease of access. You can just have a link and the student can access it from their cell phones, and it's scalable. It doesn't, big blue button, it's got scalability issues. So this is especially if we talk about large numbers, 20,000, etc., then, and Google is for free.
Okay, thank you. Can I stop it there, please? Can we thank Professor Dani du Plessis? Just give them and releasing, and thank you. Okay, can we take questions now for the other two speakers, Professor Dube and Dr. Hosbrook, Dr. Connie Hosbrook. No questions. Oh yeah, Prof. Dave from engineering.
Maybe just a comment. At the School of Engineering, we started with a big experiment this year by having a so-called winter school, community engagement winter school. So what we did is we took the lecturers in renewable energy and also in telecommunications, and then we took all the postgraduate students and then we invited about 4 TVET colleges, and we also invited a number of students from communities, even as far as Cape Town and Eastern Cape. And then we had about a 5-week school where we started looking at how can the postgraduate projects be applied to the community. And we identified some products that can actually be marketed in the community and create jobs. And at the end of the 5 weeks, we had about 4 prototypes staged. And this was the first attempt, and I think that was quite an achievement. And this is something that probably could be expanded to other schools as well.
Thank you for that comment. And maybe it's a good idea that we don't think just in terms of answering questions, but comments, maybe good practices from your spaces or issues that you want to raise. It feels a bit silly doing this, but I really can't see. Can I see if there are other questions or comments on community engagement or on this idea of a narrative from the mountain of, what was it? The town called potential from the near the mountain of possibility. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, allow me to thank Professor Dube and Dr. Connie Hosbrook for their presentations and give them their gifts. If I may. Dr. Kasturi Baharalik is an academic and professional staff development lecturer in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching in the Center for Higher Education Development at the University of Cape Town. She currently convenes and teaches on the new Academic Practitioners Program, the short course on teaching, and the Learning and Teaching in Higher Education module of the postgraduate diploma and master's coursework, all of which focus on the professional development of emerging new and established academics. The courses foreground academics' positionality, background and experience, and recognize their purpose, commitment, and personal projects in higher education in relation to social change. Her PhD study, completed in 2015, was a social realist analysis of new academics' exercise of agency conducive to the social inclusion of students. The theoretical framing of her doctoral study, namely critical and social realism, continues to inform her current pedagogical and methodological practices and are directed at the interplay between structures, national, institutional, departmental, and disciplinary, the cultures and lecturer agency in the enactment of the curriculum. She supervises postgraduate students at master's and PhD levels and serves as examiner and moderator of many courses. Her research interests include critical pedagogies, social justice pedagogies, critical professional staff development, and inducting the next generation of academics into higher education in a post-colonial context. She is currently the chairperson of the Higher Education Learning and Teaching Association of South Africa, HELTASA, and serves on the Council for the International Consortium for Educational Development. She's on the steering committee for the National Teaching Excellence Awards of the Council of Higher Education and HELTASA, as well as National Teaching Framework Project. She's a member of the Black Academic Caucus at UCT and co-chair of the Curriculum Change Working Group commissioned by the UCT Vice-Chancellor Dr. Max Price to facilitate engagements on curriculum change and decolonization of practices across UCT faculties. Dr. Bahari Leek, you are most welcome at Unisa. Maybe as you walk up, we can just also pick up on some of the themes that some of what is transformation is how the academics position themselves, how they themselves individually undergo that transformation. You're most welcome.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction and for the invitation. Thank you to the College of Human Sciences and Prof. Moche for inviting me to be part of this important teaching and learning festival at Unisa. In the higher education sector right now, it's almost impossible to talk about teaching and learning without talking about the calls made by students for the decolonization of the curriculum. Decolonization is not a new concept or movement, and many leading African intellectuals have been critiquing the colonial nature of African universities for decades. In 2015 and 2016, protesting students in South Africa started interrogating the colonial canon, questioning the colonial archive, and calling out the colonial discourses that have shaped deficit models of education. These models have kept people impoverished, unable to thrive or speak or be heard. In 2015, the decolonization movement spurred a paradigm shift in higher education, away from the discourse on transformation, which student and staff groupings critiqued for its slow pace and overt focus on demographic and structural changes at universities. Transformation of higher education, as it was understood post-94, did not address the systemic challenges which still manifested in low throughput rates for Black students. It kept us locked in a rainbowism, and although the higher education sector had changed in size and shape, there was very little transformation in higher education, as the Sodine report of 2015 highlighted. Our colonial sensibilities were disrupted when students put the traditional curriculum under the spotlight. We saw the extent to which institutionalized and canonized disciplines, knowledge, and their related hegemonic practices had become normalized. We saw how these had continued to exclude and alienate students in ways that did not keep pace with the policy and structural changes initiated by the new regime. Students severely critiqued the perpetuation of cultural assumptions and dominant epistemologies of Northern and Western rationalities, which produced a narrow approach to scholarship in Africa, reinforcing unequal social relations of power. In the South African context, traditional ways of reviewing or reforming curricula place a heavy focus on content, programs, levels, years of study, selection, sequencing, and pacing, to borrow a few terms from Bernstein, and preparing graduates for a market-driven economy. The student protest in 2015 was a first rupture with this tradition, and many Black academics felt for the first time they had a voice. Instead of review and reform, we now focus sharply on the dominant colonial epistemic and its power to marginalize people and Black bodies in particular. Through these interrogations of traditional curricula, we saw glimpses of what is possible through an imagined curriculum that can be socially just and inclusive if we focus on different questions. In the calls for decolonization of the curriculum, it is prudent to think about the curriculum with a big C, as an overarching term encompassing teaching, learning, assessment, and content. Pedagogy, which is the discipline that deals with the theory and practice of teaching, is the mode through which the curriculum is articulated, enunciated, and enacted. And it is through pedagogy that we see the values and purposes of the curriculum and its desired outcomes. While it is important to see teaching and learning as integral to curriculum, for purposes of analysis, it is also important to disaggregate these components to see what their individual, emergent properties and powers are. In critical realist terms, all entities have emergent powers and properties that are triggered by the conditions that can be enabling or constraining. To conflate these aspects is to commit what critical realist Bhaskar calls the epistemic fallacy, where what something is conflated with what it can do. All entities work in different domains and have structural, cultural, and personal emergent properties, which, when triggered, emerge in particular ways for specific effects. To apply this analytical dualism to curriculum and teaching and learning, the curriculum, which is what we teach, is equally important to pedagogy, which is how we teach. But while these are related, they are separate and different things. When they are brought together with a particular set of conditions, they may lead to the emergence of something else, something new, something not previously envisaged, depending on how agents take them up and exercise choices about how to enact and embody them. In similar ways, teaching and learning have been caught in a conceptual and discursive vice, and it is seldom that we can talk about the one without the other. There are innumerable permutations in putting these two constructs together, and each iteration signals a slightly different relationship with different effects. We have teaching and learning, learning and teaching, teaching-learning, teaching/learning. What I would like to advance is that no matter what the combination, there can be no teaching without a learner or a knower in mind. There are always participants in the act of teaching. Teaching is directed at someone or a group of people for a specific purpose, be it to learn disciplinary skills, literacy and numeracy skills, and so on. However, the converse is not always true. For learning to occur, there does not have to be an explicit teacher. Learning is happening all the time, through the explicit goals of the curriculum, but also through the hidden curriculum, and often with unanticipated consequences and unintended outcomes. Learning happens in and beyond the proverbial classroom, through different sources, different modes, and different platforms. Babies and toddlers are learning as much through overt means from their parents as they are by observing, listening, and paying attention to what their parents are not saying. So learning can happen even through absences and silences. It therefore becomes even more urgent, and especially in an age of digital communication, social media, the internet, and information overload, that teaching is done in more deliberate and considered ways, with serious intent and purpose. How we teach can either complement what we teach when there's alignment with content, or it can subvert what we teach where the content is problematic. The point is that the way we teach is not neutral or value-free. In the 80s and early 90s, many of us taught in ways that resisted and subverted apartheid's Christian national education curriculum. We taught against the grain of a totalizing curriculum. Through our pedagogy, we highlighted the ills and pitfalls of a curriculum that was designed to divide and separate people into racial and class categories. We taught as activists mobilizing for change. This teaching didn't happen in a vacuum, unaware of its history and context. In the context of South Africa right now, it is important that we grapple with what it means to teach in context, and with a consciousness about where we've come from and what we're trying to repair. In an effort towards transforming learning and teaching, as the conference title suggests, it is important to observe the word towards, which shows movement and action. In decolonial scholar Walter Mignola's terms, this word towards indicates a conscious gesture with intentionality and purpose that suggests a move to something else. There is a de-linking with what has been. The decolonial gesture is always de-linking from coloniality. The D in decolonial emphasizes the confrontation with colonial at the very moment that it appears. In teaching, de-linking means being engaged in teaching projects and processes of reimagining the world anew. The word transformation is a compelling discourse in higher education, but it has been de-linked from the decolonization discourse. It carries a particular history and meaning post-94, but like curriculum reform and review, the word transformation has lost its original meaning and has become what linguists would call semantically bleached. But it is used because it is a safe word, and people feel more comfortable talking about transformation than decolonization. Decolonization evokes varied response from academics and students. Many react with a sense of disbelief, distrust, and resistance, evoking all the familiar reactions that come with being subjugated for a long time. Decolonization is seen as scary, violent, and traumatic. But the discourse of decoloniality adds a necessary and critical tangent to the transformation discourse, because it focuses not only on the what and the how, but also the why. Purpose is everything. To this end, it's important to see that decolonization is not quite the same thing as decoloniality. Decolonial scholars assert that while the former marks a break with structural aspects of colonization, decoloniality is a much deeper process of unlearning ways in which colonial traditions have been internalized and normalized through years of indoctrination. Both share a view of coloniality as a fundamental problem in the modern age, and of decoloniality as a necessary task that remains unfinished. What does this mean for the higher education teacher today? Can we afford to be naive about what needs to be done, or plead ignorance about what has been uncovered? Can it be business as usual in the face of what we now know and we can see? How do higher education teachers, whose teaching efforts are usually geared towards students learning new things, help students to unlearn the old tropes and practices that don't serve them anymore? I'm going to offer some thoughts today on how we can move towards transforming teaching and learning by adopting a decolonial pedagogy, and thus revitalize the word transformation for the purposes of reshaping and reframing the epistemic and the social project in higher education. My insights are gleaned from my work as a teaching and learning specialist at UCT, in regional and national engagements, as a chair of HELTASA, as a council member of ICED, and through my involvement as the co-chair of the Curriculum Change Working Group at UCT. In 2016, student protests prompted the Vice-Chancellor of UCT to set up task teams to facilitate campus-wide engagements on a range of critical issues in ways previously not explored. The CCWG was established in 2016 as a Black-led, inclusive, and broadly representative grouping comprising academics and students traditionally excluded from formal institutional structures and processes of curriculum oversight. The collective wisdom in the group was based on individual members' previous experience in tackling challenges of inequality in their teaching, and through their success in opening up spaces for critical discussions about curriculum. The role of the CCWG was to shape strategies for engaging with academics and students through facilitated dialogues on curriculum change. During the campus shutdown last year, we worked across a number of sites at UCT. This work continued in the post-shutdown phase into 2017. At 3 specific sites, students invited us to engage the faculty and department on issues of race, class, gender, privilege, and language that students and academics were surfacing as they uncovered what kept coloniality in play. In each of these sites, while curriculum was the focus, a number of pedagogical and assessment issues were highlighted by students as being alienating and exclusionary. From students' challenges at these sites, it became even more clear to us that we need a decolonial pedagogy to address the underlying issues and tensions that have led to students and academics experiencing higher education in the negative way that they do. The critical realist transcendental question is all the more relevant now. What must conditions be like for the world to be experienced in this way by students and academics? I'm going to look now at the world of the proverbial higher education classroom, as it was, and perhaps in large part still is. Many would assert that we engage for most part in what McLaren calls a pacifying pedagogy, aimed at compliance and assimilation. The classroom is a disciplinary and academic socialization site, which revels in technical prowess, but thrives in an apolitical and ahistorical setting. We draw on psychologized and pathologized approaches to learning and teaching, and their complementary teaching styles. We are often teaching with an idealized learner in mind, who all supposedly learn in similar ways. This decontextualized learner evokes a deficit teaching approach. We teach to fix the problem. And although we allow for critical questions and clarifications, our aim is to change behavior so that students learn and pass. Our teaching methods might involve group work to add variety, but in the main, they are based on an individualistic model of teaching. The myth of meritocracy assumes that if students work hard and have sufficient motivation, they will succeed, despite a host of contextual factors that have led to their situation in the first place. Equally, if they're failing, they're doing so because of their own inability to crack the code. But what is our culpability as higher education teachers when students fail? The materials we draw on in our work is primarily from the North and the West. Higher education development, for example, leans heavily on the UK and Australian models of teacher training and academic development, originally devised by white males and reproduced by us without much critical or contextual engagement. When academics have had no professional development, common sense teaching persists, but this no longer has a place in higher education. We cannot teach like we were taught, as these approaches only reproduce inequities and inequality. Having a PhD in your field does not qualify you to teach. Teaching is not a common sense craft activity. For those who have a natural flair for the stage or for interacting with people, teaching might be easier, as people are able to hold a space in a way that allows students to follow and learn. But good teaching is about far deeper issues than good presentation skills or being able to use PowerPoint well. Good facilitation skills, whether online or face-to-face. This ability is not worth much if one is not able to relate to the real students you're engaging with and the challenges they bring to the interaction. A decolonial approach to teaching calls for a disruption of worldviews and paradigms. We need to interrogate the canon and the ways we enact the canon. In Megan Bowler's terms, we need a pedagogy of discomfort that takes students out of their comfort zones into areas of critical engagement with content, but in relation to context, history, positionality, ideology, literacy, and criticality. But with this pedagogy of discomfort comes a pedagogy of care. We need to create conditions for students to feel safe enough to raise difficult questions and to challenge existing power relations. Based on my work across numerous local and teaching spaces, I think that a decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be aware and to act on that awareness. I think this is what the younger generation calls being lit and woke. Let us look briefly at what it might mean to be lit and woke as higher education teachers, moving towards transforming teaching and learning through a decolonial pedagogy. I will share a few options, which are not exhaustive, but could be a starting point for thinking about moving towards transforming teaching and learning in higher education. A decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be socially aware and active. Awareness of social context is important in the act of teaching. Teaching should be framed with an assessment of where we're going as a country and as a reflection on the issues we are struggling with as a society. In a decolonial frame, teaching should endeavor to reverse the gaze for looking at African universities And in terms of historical context and privilege, teaching should problematize the notion of excellence. What counts as excellent teaching and learning, and who can demonstrate this, needs to be redefined. It calls for, according to Ngugi, a repositioning and a recentering of that which is sacred, indigenous, and homegrown. What does this mean for teaching and learning? I'm reminded here of Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story. How stories are told, who tells them, when they're told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The consequence of a single story is that it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how different we are rather than how we are similar. The single story, Adichie says, creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. In our teaching, how do we work with single stories of students and other academics? When are we the beneficiaries of single stories? And when are we the perpetrators? Do we trouble stereotypes and tropes by asking critical questions? Or do we reinforce them by making them humorous and palatable? Students also question single stories in university texts, which are replete with examples that privilege those with the cultural capital to succeed at university. In our teaching, do we use contextualized examples, local references, recognizable names and places, so that students can recognize themselves in what they learn? What are the materials students should be exposed to, and in what order and perspective? How can we challenge the traditional approach to textbooks by incorporating African examples and cases? The second approach, or the second example, is a decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be spatially aware. If we look at the design of the lecture hall or the classroom, what do we see? A lectern or pulpit at the front, and neat rows of desks and benches in the auditorium. What does this tell us? The teacher is the preacher, and the students are the listeners, eagerly waiting to hear lessons from the expert. If we look outside at how our cities are planned, the urban and rural divide, city and landscape, who's at the center and who's at the margins? How do we teach in ways that disrupt this traditional way of thinking about space and place? How do the spaces we create enable academics and students to engage in personable ways with each other, as if each had something to offer and to shape the experience? The decolonizing movement suggests that the classroom is both political and personal. How can we change teaching spaces to make explicit the links between the university and its social, political, and economic links? A decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be contextually aware. Decolonization announced itself as a disruption of the colonial ways of being. And this disruption was understood by critics to be a fundamental attack on the very nature of the university and of science, because everything that was sacrosanct in the academe was being questioned and threatened. But according to Homi Bhabha, disruption as a mode of articulation was exactly what was needed to interrupt, interrogate, enunciate, and blur the limitations of boundaries. Students led this disruption by critiquing colonial names of buildings, statues, ceremonies, artworks, literary archives, language, pedagogy, assessment, and so on. According to decol scholar Grossvogel, by displacing the cultural and knowledge practices that have been normalized, decolonization aims to disrupt our internalized and naturalized frames of reference. Disruption with care in teaching was and still is an imperative to jolt us out of our constructed realities. and to account for our complicity and passivity in reproducing the status quo. For a nation that is supposedly free from the shackles of apartheid, which was not only a racializing project, but a highly successful colonial project, we still think and act like a shackled society, only now more at the behest of modernity and neoliberal persuasions. A decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be conceptually aware. Traditional classroom practices are based largely on Freire's concept of banking education, where students are seen as empty vessels that teachers, as the only knowledgeable experts, fill them with information and knowledge. A decolonial pedagogy acknowledges that students and many Black academics struggle for recognition as human beings, and they do not consider themselves to be empty vessels or blank slates, but credible academics. According to Grossvogel, Black lives are constructed the world over as non-beings and are aggravated by race and class, while their counterparts occupying the zone of being are mitigated by racial privilege. How does this play out in our classrooms and curricula? Who gets to speak and who has to listen? Who is called upon to hold the floor? And what does this mean for those who are silenced? Who is still in the zone of non-being in our classes? Students ask critical questions about who gets to write textbooks. In other words, who gets to archive and create knowledge, and for whom? What does knowledge do? Whose interests are served? Is the knowledge we produce relevant to the societies in which we live? Teachers also need to question how disciplines discipline students to think in certain ways and not in others. And what does this selection do for developing the full human being? A decolonial pedagogy creates more opportunities to expose students to ways of thinking associated with disciplines beyond their primary areas of specialization. According to Moyo, this requires us to decolonize teaching by shifting the geography of reason, which means opening reason beyond Eurocentric and provincial horizons, as well as producing knowledge beyond strict disciplinary impositions. A decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be emotionally aware. Given the emotional and affective labor that decolonization involves, teaching and learning engagements call on teachers and students to be actively involved in sharing the responsibility for the safe and brave spaces in which transformative teaching takes place. To do this is to expand and extend an otherwise limited repertoire, as it requires both the head and the heart to engage in a process that thinks and feels, contrary to the Academy's aversion to blend cognition and emotion. Decolonization discussions are emotionally charged and engaging, but deeply discomforting at the same time, because students are calling on us to change and break with the similar and the familiar. For many academics and some students, decolonization indicates a deep-seated loss of traditional ways of being and knowing. When traditions are contested and resisted, those fearful of the loss are not convinced that the alternative is any good or that it will serve their needs, or the change agents are credible. In disrupting what was considered normal, students have forced the higher education sector to focus sharply on the question, normal for whom? Daily, students experience alienation, marginalization, cultural and social exclusion as normal ways of being at the university. So when students do challenge us, they can't be penalized or reprimanded for doing so. These are not easy issues to engage with, but they cannot be ignored either. Denialism and sugarcoating have left us bereft as a country, still struggling with historical wounds that have present-day consequences, especially for students navigating a higher education system where their cultural capital is not recognized as a currency that academia trades in. A decolonial pedagogy also calls on us to be personally aware. For the higher education teacher, geography and biography are both important to critically look at where we are located and where we enunciate from. What is our power in the classroom? What is our privilege? How do we declare our positionality? This intersection between biography and geography is critical for our stance in teaching. Who we are is important. It's not just what we know. Academics and students' positionality linked to issues of identity, belonging, diversity, racism, and sexism must be engaged with in teaching and learning. A decolonial pedagogy is ontological, not just epistemological. This enables students to see the link between epistemological relevance and our identities. And finally, a decolonial pedagogy calls on us to be relationally aware. In other words, can we see the me in the we? Teaching and learning is foremost a social interaction built on social relationships between students and teachers. It involves both the cognitive and affective aspects of our being. These relationships depend on each other to succeed and need to be done with full awareness of the relationship between social context and the knowledge project. At its most basic level, this manifests in engagements in the classroom. Instead of pacifying or paternalistic pedagogies, we need participatory pedagogies that encourage sharing and a mutual dependence. We need to move from a more teacher-centered approach to a student-centered decolonial pedagogy to encourage students to exercise their agency. Our collective agency is important to bring about a relational epistemology based on our already innate sense as human beings sharing a common space. This would help us to focus our attention on our interrelatedness and our interdependence with each other and our greater surroundings. Any move towards transforming teaching and learning needs an intentionality and dedicated labor and committed action if we are to make good on the initial work done by students to raise consciousness about our higher education in crisis after 23 years of supposed freedoms. A possible decolonization turn in South Africa presents us with an opportunity to address the unfinished business of coloniality and to think deeply about what to do in higher education to bring about sustainable change. There is the danger, though, that if we don't turn now, we might, in 20 years down the line, again realize that we missed a great opportunity to engage with change in the way we've been called on to do so right now in South Africa and in the world. How we choose to go about this task, which is dependent, like I've said, on contexts, agents, social purpose, and educational intent, is also how we will be remembered and archived. Thank you.
Dr. Behari Leek, thank you very much for that presentation that kind of captures a lot of the conversations at Unisa as well, in general, but then also specifically in this Teaching and Learning Festival. Maybe just a small correction, it's not only the College of Human Sciences, it's actually Professor Moche's whole portfolio, and we are co-hosting with the College of Law, but you were interacting with us, that's why you... But I just want to acknowledge our colleagues from the College of Law and the Vice Principal as being the custodian of our festival. Some of the themes that we were talking about earlier, the role of narrative and stories and storytelling, and thank you for reminding us that we should not have only one story and that even one person does not have only one story. The idea of exploding stereotypes and trying to show that there are different ways of doing, and bringing those at the margins into the center. The idea of a kind of disruptive activism we've already talked about, with attitudes of love and rage. That love and rage, attitudes of love and rage is a decolonial kind of way of expressing yourself. But also emphasizing the intentionality and the dedication that is required. This is not something that's going to happen by itself. We have to intentionally dedicate ourselves to that. Then another theme is this shifting the types of knowledge that are already out there, but which have been kept on the margins, where only the rational and individualistic and objective is in the center and regarded as acceptable knowledge, whereas we should be including the personal, as Dr. Connie did this morning, the emotional, the visual, the embodied, and the communal. And then, as a last theme that we've already identified this morning, is what you call to see the me in the we. And we talked about not just doing the right things, but actually being in right relationship. So there's a lot of resonance between what you said and what we are doing, but thank you very much for your presentation. Colleagues, it is time to engage with Dr. Kasturi. Can I have questions? I just have to, before I take questions, can we take 3? And then she can respond, and then maybe we can take another 3. I just have to see if this thing still works. Does it work? Okay. Professor Lorette. Lorette? Oh, Nomshadu is now somewhere else. Ingrid, thank you.
Ashes are coming, but I'm running around.
Thank you, Henrietta.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for a most interesting and fantastic presentation and all the interesting things that you've mentioned. You only in passing mentioned language. So my question is about language. What is your view on the tension on the one hand between choosing English as a language of tuition in our context of decolonization, and the opportunities of English as a world language that we all, I think, understand. But my question is more on do you see our multilingual, multicultural nature also penetrating higher education in substantial ways? And because I'm interested in that from technology point of view, and how can technology help us to actually bridge the language divide that we've also seen disrupted our education system substantially in the recent past? Thank you.
Could we have a second question? Where? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to find out from Dr. Kasturi concerning assessment. How do you feel about currently the way in which assessment is done, and is there a way that it can be improved in order to reflect the current conversations on transformation? Thank you.
Okay, a third question. Those are 2 big questions, so maybe we should... Okay, do you want to give it a go?
Thank you for the questions. Those are huge questions, but I shall attempt them. And just to say, maybe to disclaim, that this is a conversation, and I want to disrupt the idea that there's a knowledgeable expert in front of you, that we are all trying to work this out together. but that is not a cop-out in terms of not answering the questions. So I think that, at a recent talk at UCT, Prof. Mamdani spoke about language being central to the decolonization project. Now, how we look at language and what it does, I think is more important in terms of redressing some of the inequalities that we've experienced through language than thinking about language as a means to something else. So if you think about language as an integral way in which we've come to know the world and how we see ourselves and how our concept of identity is formed, but more importantly, where does our self-confidence come from? When you switch to a language that is not your own, what happens immediately to your sense of confidence in terms of using a language that you don't own? Now, students in our system experience this from primary school right through to higher education. So it is obvious to me that we need to do something about language. I'm not sure that we can do that in one fell swoop, given that textbooks and technology, etc., have already been, written in English, and it seems to be the key mode of communication. But perhaps in understanding what translanguaging can do, for example, in the higher education classroom. We used to speak about code switching back in the day. But this has evolved somewhat, and we're looking at not just using language, indigenous languages, to decode English, but actually to use our own languages to develop our understanding of concepts. So there is the concept in English, and in order to understand that, I need to feel confident in my own sense of self that I can tackle those concepts, etc., with the language at my disposal. Now, I think that in classroom teaching, in the assignments we set, in the examples we use, in the group work activities that students get engaged with, and I know that yours is a distance learning platform, so often when I speak about the classroom, I say proverbial classroom, because that means different things for us in different spaces. But how do we build that sense of confidence that those languages are not second class? And for me, that is the first step of trying to figure out how we're going to use language in all sorts of ways. So if people can speak their language and not be embarrassed and not be ashamed because they're going to be laughed at because of the accents that they use, etc., then we are on some starting point to redressing the language imbalance. And from there, I'm sure with all the geniuses we have in higher education, we can figure out how the instrumental issues and logistics work. On the issue of assessment, that's a huge question, but I think, assessment has been a problem in higher education for all time. And why? Because no matter how scientific and objective we try to make assessments, they are as subjective as the number of academics we have in the system anyway. So given that it is subjective, what can we do about the questions we ask, and who asks the questions? Is it possible to introduce more peer assessments? Are there ways to, if you like, triangulate the answers? So what other versions of the same story can a student provide so that they are giving you a fuller, more holistic picture? How do we use the rubric? So when we think about assessment, we've got to think about it outside the technical function of grading and awarding marks. Because students are learning through assessments a particular logic. They learn what is valued. They learn what you are legitimating by placing 10 marks for the answer instead of 2. So there's an unconscious, tacit learning that is happening through your assessment practice. So when you look at the instrument and look at your question papers, you need to see what students are reading about what you consider to be important. If you look at the questions in particular, how many of the questions in the various disciplines, and it may be more difficult in some than others, allow students to discuss, to engage, to give their opinion, to contextualize? How much of the question paper is about regurgitation? So we can stand in front of the classroom and make wonderful claims about being critical and engaging in dialogue, And then when they see the question paper, it's the opposite of everything we've said. So there's a mixed signal. There's no alignment between what we are holding as important teaching and learning practice and the assessment practice. So most teachers on our programs will say, well, how do I change the assessment? Well, you change the assessment. That's how you change the assessment. But you change it with an understanding of what is the purpose, what are you trying to achieve, what do you want them to learn, what are the different aspects that you're trying to develop. There's some strange kind of thing that happens in our heads when we start setting exam papers. We leave all of that outside the room, and we get very serious and technical about what we are assessing. I don't know if that goes some way towards answering that question, but the actual, again, nuts and bolts, we can work out as soon as we have that shift in mindset about what assessments are trying to achieve.
Okay, we have a question here, please. And maybe just to remember that there was an actual essay called the English essay as the highest form of civilization, of colonial civilization.
Thank you for your very enlightening presentation. I want to refer to your statement that you made regarding ideologies that's informing methodologies, which assumes that we are implicitly working with underlying ideologies. And then the problem that we're having, the problem of transition from colonial apartheid to democratic South Africa, and the absence of a very clear ideology. During apartheid, we have been drilled and we have been informed by a very clear articulated philosophy that was also a policy of education. You made reference to the Christian national education that was expressed in the philosophy of fundamental pedagogy, which is still the dominant form of practice that informs our educational practice, teaching and learning. So what I find missing, and I know that we're working within a decolonial paradigm, but what is still very much absent in our teaching and learning agendas is a clearly articulated alternative to Christian national education and fundamental pedagogics. However, you did base your presentation on critical realism, which I think should provide that alternative. But what is missing, perhaps you can guide us towards really giving us a clear direction to move during this transitionary period towards a more democratic, inclusive, decolonial paradigm for teaching and learning. Thank you.
Can I see if there's another question? Are there Professor Gundani and then Professor Dube? Professor Gundani is right there.
Thank you, Professor, for that enlightening lecture. Decoloniality seems to emphasize de-linking, you say, and I think that is important. But it needs to be further interrogated, in my view, because what colonial education managed to do was to de-link the student from the context and to give education for another world, to alienate the student from the context of Africa, to learn about the prairies in Canada and about the English Constitution and about every other Northwestern or Atlantic world. And so you could be uprooted. It was a system of uprooting. epistemic uprooting. I think, yes, we can talk and go to town about delinking, but I think we should also emphasize the need for a decolonial education that relinks. So from delinking to relinkage, where I'm thinking of epistemic relinkage, being able to have ways and means of retrieving. Now, that is very difficult. What do we retrieve? And how do we retrieve that which is positive from Africa, from our context, which has been marginalized? Because coloniality has to do with marginalizing one epistemic philosophy, replacing it with another. Now, relinking, I think, is very important because that is the only way of reintroducing and instilling belonging for the African student so that they appreciate their society and also find solutions for Africa and for the context as they also relate to other epistemologies. So, yes, delinking, but I think this must be balanced with relinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such an interesting talk and for sort of making our minds think even broadly or even get more confused for some of us. My interest is with, as institutions or of higher education, as universities, we have this journey that we need to actually start working on now. And the cohort of the educators or the practitioners are coming from a system that already has made them think in a certain way. So we are trying, and then we try to help the learners to unlearn what we have not unlearned. If that makes sense. So, from your own point of view, how do you see the practitioners taking this journey forward, and with what sort of success or what mechanisms need to be in place for the practitioner to be comfortable, for a practitioner to be in a space where they can also assist the unlearning process?
Can you take those three?
Thank you very much for those questions. Perhaps to start with a comment and the assertion made by the second speaker. I think thank you. Thank you for that, pointing out that relinking is what we need. I think that's an important concept to take on board. So as we do the D, we also need to do the building. So we need to do the other side as well. That's important. Now, in terms of the CCWG work at UCT, you might have seen on the slide, we came up with a theory of change, and it has 5 phases to help us, to work through the different faculties at UCT. The first phase is contestation, and after 18 months, we have found that most of the faculties and departments we work in are still at the contestation phase. The second phase is a repositioning. So after people, and it doesn't work in neat kind of cycles like that, many of the processes overlap. But as people work through different layers of contestation, they begin to reposition. So in a sense, I'm hinting at the other 2 questions as well, because all of this goes towards the ideology and unlearning. So in repositioning, then people have put forward new proposals for doing curriculum differently and for teaching differently. So we have courses now that are called Decolonizing Pedagogy, offered to tutors, to teaching assistants, etc. So what you did with your comment is to remind me and remind us that we can't be stuck in the contestation phase. In terms of the ideology, now this is another question that, is posed quite often. And often it comes from irritated people who can't quite, and they call it talk shops, and especially the technology people say, give us solutions. Other people say, give us a checklist. How do you do this decolonization thing? Now, that's the most difficult of all questions, because it goes to the heart of what decolonization is saying. So until you get the thinking right, until you get the heart right, until you get the intentionality right, you can use as many new techniques as you want, and you can Google as much as you want and use all the latest technology. We're still going to be where we are. Because fundamentally, we haven't changed the belief system that we hold around what teaching and learning is about. And therein lies the ideology. There's no great person who's going to beam down from somewhere and present us with the ideology for decolonization. We have got to, in this cultural domain, which is exactly what we're doing right now, is testing out our ideas. We are listening to some, we are interrogating others, and you need to watch yourself as comments come up, or when prompts come up, or when people speak. What is your intuitive, knee-jerk reaction when you hear something different? Is it to resist? Is it to be open? Is it to be honest about the ways in which you have been socialized? So it's reckoning with all those things. It's overcoming those intuitive responses that say, that won't work. What are they talking about? Well, then, don't use any technology if you say you want to Africanize, etc., etc. So ideologies are built as much on positive regard as they may be built on negative regard. And we need to catch ourselves in the moment. And I think academics need to work with that first, before that teaching and learning engagement is going to change for students. Students know, and often as a result of many other ways of socializing, they look to the teacher for guidance, for leading that sort of engagement. So it is critical that we understand what we're trying to do. And that brings me to the third question. So how do we unlearn? I want to give an example perhaps of a program that I convene, not for students, but they're with new academics who come on a professional development course in order to teach better for students in their classes. And for the last, since 2012, we've been working on a program that takes academics away on a 3-day residential retreat. Now, I want to talk about the program and changing the program as a way of unlearning and re-signaling and re-linking, if you like, with what the ideology and intention is. So on the first day of the retreat, in the morning session, we used to invite the institutional speaker. This used to be the VC or any of the DVCs or somebody in top management. And so we started our program by saying, good morning, welcome to this professional development program, and now I'd like to hand over to the VC. The second session was on ad hoc promotions. So these are the ways in which, if you're thinking about as a new academic of climbing this ladder, these are the protocols you must follow. The third session was on research. If you want to get ahead, you really must research. Yet, the program was on teaching and learning. So in the first day, we signaled with a top-down approach that the structural opportunities at UCT are most important. We reinforced the idea that you must climb the ladder. This is how you must do it. Get ahead. And then on the second day, we went to, how do you teach in your class? So in the last 2 years, we've turned the program on its head. And the first session is about who are you? What do you bring? What are those things that you bring to the teaching engagement that might not have been valued in the past? How do you work with people? What are your relation skills? How will that come into the teaching engagement? And so we uncovered, just in them getting to know each other, who they are, and brought the emphasis to them. And the second session was to invite a group of postgrad students who've come through the system to talk to new academics about what it means to sit in an undergraduate class. So just in that maybe simple or simplistic way, I'm indicating how we can revitalize, redo, and that came as a result of a lot of introspection and reflection on what are we trying to achieve, and continuing the program because that's how it was always done. Okay.
Thank you. Can I just check if there are more questions, more comments? Did you put your hand up, sir, or did you just, no, you just came. Okay, gone. Dr. Kasturi, thank you very much for arriving, for I think that shows how happy they are that you came. For giving us that very coherent set of ideas around decoloniality and decolonizing the pedagogy, and for being with us and allowing our questions and our engagements. The one thing we are getting right is timing, because it is 12 o'clock and time for lunch. So just to check with you so that everybody's on the same page. I have to give you. Sorry. Everyone's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Colleagues, just to remind you that we have now just finished the second session, which is on the program session 1. We are going to lunch now, and then directly after lunch at 1 o'clock, so please all be back at 1 o'clock. We will have session 2, which starts with Dr. Motladi Setlako, that session. We will start with at 1 o'clock. And then I just need to make sure, though, that you understand that please don't leave when the students are on, because they're now going to be on at the end. So please, let's respect the students. They've been moved along now as well, so that they don't come to an empty hall. So we're going to lunch. I just want to mention that there is halal and vegetarian on the side for those who requested that. And then to remind you of the graffiti wall. Remember, your knowledge is also important. We want to be visual in how we express ourselves. So, and thank you again for the colleagues who have been shifted around for being so accommodating, the ones at the front here and some of the others which I see in the audience. We cannot thank you enough for allowing us to play with the program. Thank you. I hope you enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock.